Welcome to Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant podcast. These are the stories of those who have received, given, and who are waiting for the gift of life, organ transplantation. Now here's your host and heart and kidney recipient, BJ Odom.
Welcome to a special edition of Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. Please subscribe and give us that 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcast. Episode 5 celebrates the miraculous journey of organ transplant recipients and incredible individuals who stand by their side. Today, we delve into a heartwarming tale of love, resilience, and an unwavering support that transcends the boundaries of life itself. Join us as we shine a spotlight on the extraordinary bond between Glenn, a liver transplant recipient, and Tree, his steadfast caregiver, on a journey filled with love, gratitude, gratefulness, and endless inspiration. This is a story that reminds us that the profound impact of compassion and selflessness in the face of adversity. So grab a tissue, open your hearts, and prepare to be moved by a narrative that enables the true essence of the gift of life. Tree, I want to thank you so much for sharing you and Glenn's story. If you could, let's just start from the beginning and tell us how it all started.
Oh, Glenn and I met, it'll be 25 years this November at a NASCAR race down in Homestead. A friend of ours brought him and I came and we had, kept running into each other at the different places in the pits and stuff like that. And then I didn't really pay much attention to him because, cars and stuff. And then we ended up sitting beside each other and during the race and talking, and he shared his headphones with me and I shared my binos with him, and we just talked, and we were laughing at the young people that were getting drunk and stupid, and then at the end of the race he got up, took his glasses off, took my hand in his and said it was in both his and looked me in the eyes and said it was nice to meet me, and I have this thing for eyes, and then we went out a couple times and I decided, I didn't want to do this. And I threw his phone number away. And then I flew home to California and I came back on January 7th, hadn't even been home for 24 hours. And he said, I think we've got something and I know you do too. And let's give it a chance. And we've been together ever since. And he passed away just 3 days shy of our 24th year. And the only rule I had was he couldn't ask me to marry him. And he broke that when we were doing his bucket list. And that was a little over 9 years ago. And his best friend asked him, okay, well, let's talk about your bucket list now that we've got everything else done, because he wasn't doing well. And he points across the table and says, I want to marry her. And so 3 days later, we got married. So I've never regretted any of the time with him. I mean, we had a lot of adventures, and I always told everybody, BJ, God made him just for me. He was the perfect balance to me, and I was the perfect balance to him. And we had a good life. And even after he got sick, I made sure, we still had a good life. And the transplant, when it finally came to it, holy cow, he was in and out of the hospital, when things started going bad, and we were spending 2 and 3 weeks a month up at Shands because that's the hospital we chose after I laid out all my homework and everything. And we never regretted that either. We had to sign a contract with them and we took classes and everything, and they walked us through stuff. But Glenn had been, this was his 38th year. So Glenn had been sober for like 26 years when his liver finally went bad. And we just thought that wasn't fair, but it is what it is. And there's a lot of things, when you go through a liver transplant, they don't tell you about because they don't want to plant seeds in your head, and as they kept telling us, no transplant is the same. Everybody has different things, but, nobody told us about encephalopathy. Nobody told us, about ascites. There's so many things that they don't tell you about. but they did, they encourage you to go forward with all of this. And Glenn had cancer in his liver. And so we went into the hospital for them to do an ablation and an embolization and all of those things, but that killed more of the liver. So by August, they were thinking he wasn't going to live to the end of August, and I was thinking, okay, we can get him through to October. We're tough. We make commitments and promises to one another, and then the end of August, it'll be 9 years this year. We get that phone call, and we were prepared. But, it was our second phone call, though we had one earlier and got all the way up to Shands, and that was a no-go. And we were lucky because we only had one of those. And we've had friends and stuff that, have had 3 and 4. They do warn you about that, but it's still debilitating. It crushes you because you have to go back and wait again. And there's a lot of psychological stuff with it because, you're waiting for someone to pass away so you can live. But we made it through all of that. And he got his liver. But when they got him up to the room and I was finally allowed to see him, it's like I was trying to understand, I thought his color would change immediately. And they were telling us that the nurses up there are phenomenal. I love nurses. But anyway, she told me, sometimes it takes a little longer. And she told me to go back to the hotel because there wasn't anything I could do. And then I get back to the hotel and they're calling me back to the hospital because apparently the liver had fallen. It was too small for the cavity it was in. So they had to put him in a coma and the liver had to sit outside of him for a while. And I think it was 14 days to stabilize. Yeah. So he's got his liver in an open cavity and they put this big, ginormous vacuum pad bandage over it that sucks the ascites out of it. And it was purple. So I figured that was lucky, and then they take him back in and they put the liver back in and, it's always touch and go. His kidneys had quit, and they didn't tell us that the kidneys could go at the same time as the liver, that he might have to have a kidney transplant. There's a lot of things you don't find out till you're in the middle of all of this. Then because of all the comas he had been in, a total before he passed away, Glenn had been in 9 comas.
Oh, wow.
And so he'd had trachs and stuff put in, and they had done some damage. So we went up in December of 2015. We were stuck at Shands until his kidneys started to work. So we were away from home, for most of the year. And then they let us go home just before, it was like a week before Thanksgiving. And he was in the emergency room at Gulf Coast twice on that, and dealing with transplants down here, especially, liver, where they don't have a clue how to take care of the patient or anything. And doctors don't like to take orders from other doctors, but we were under contract to Shands and nothing could be done with him without them consulting. And so that had its own unique things, finding doctors that were willing to work with our transplant doctors. But I can be very aggressive and nonstop when I need to get things done.
Yeah, I remember back in my day of my transplant a few times when we were living in Fort Myers and I got sick. And of course, my transplants was at Tampa General. My wife and I would always say, we need to get transferred ASAP. You need to get us to Tampa. And that was, there was a couple times, when we would be in the local, and you can't blame them, but yet because they don't understand a lot of the things that transplant patients need, especially when they deal with them on a very limited basis.
Mm-hmm. And that is so true. I mean, it's so true. And because I don't know about you, but like Glenn was back then, he was taking, in the beginning, he was taking, over 50 pills a day, different 50 medications or throughout the day he had to take. I developed my own spreadsheet that I would give to the doctors, and it showed what he was taking, how much he was taking, what time of day he took it, and all of that. And then at the bottom, it had his allergies, it had the transplant team's phone numbers and fax numbers and emergency numbers and all his medical insurance stuff. So I just hand him the sheet and say, here, and that sheet was always very, very welcome. And it did help a lot. So
I don't know if Glenn was like me, but I was kind of like the same way. Well, here's a list of my medication. I knew very little, especially in the beginning, but my wife, she is the organized one. She had the pill case. Yep. She had the medicine. She had win this, win that. And I'm okay. Yeah. So caregivers are so important in this whole process.
Oh, yeah. We have to advocate to get the right doctors, because we're away from the hospitals. I went out and bought special pill cases so that, each bottle had its own little slot and everything. And I could keep all his records and everything in the case. And so if there was an emergency, that case was in the truck and I would just grab it and run with it. And like I said, I had to develop the spreadsheet because Glenn doesn't even remember most of his transplant stuff. The funny things that he does remember is the nurse holding him down so that I could cut his ponytail off because it was pulling so tight he was bleeding, and you can't have that. That's again, you have to be careful for infections and things like that. But those are things he remembers, and it's just stupid stuff. But because of that too, I think Glenn healed faster. He didn't have the kind of pain that some people we talked to had, but he couldn't tell you the medications he was taking. He couldn't tell you, he knew that I had a timer for him a voice alarm that would tell him, take your pills until, he wasn't able to do that on his own. And he would take them. I mean, he would follow the rules and everything, but anybody would ask him anything. And it's like, you have to ask my wife. I don't know, he and you got to remember too, he was in comas. He had the paralytic coma when the pseudomonas almost killed him. Well, it did kill him twice, but they brought him back. He couldn't tell you any of those things. And then he'd look at me and he'd say, he was the lucky one, because he didn't remember anything. He said she had to remember it all, and he, for the most part, every once in a while, he would slip and get angry. But for the most part, he was forever grateful, and we tell each other, we kept each other alive through all of this. And it wasn't the liver that killed him. The liver was still healthy, but it was the Parkinson's that came from all of this. And that was another thing we didn't know about,
Now, was that from was that from the comas, or was that from some of the anti-rejection drugs?
It's from a combination, the comas, the encephalopathy, and the drugs.
Now, what is the
anti-rejection drugs?
Now, what's the one thing, what is that now?
Encephalopathy with liver patients, what happens is, the liver's not working. So what happens is you get ammonia builds up on your brain, and it messes with your brain to where you will actually remember an entirely different reality. And I had, back when we started this journey, there were no transplant caregiver Facebook pages or help or anything. We really didn't know where to go. And so we were working our way through all of this, but he was furious. He was positive. In one of the actions, he was positive that I had kidnapped him, and he was yelling for the dogs to come, to sick the people that were in the room. And it was just, and then he just wanted me to go away. He was so furious, and it's like I didn't know what was going on, and the doctors and the nurses had to convince him, of what was real and what wasn't. And those are shockers, especially my Glenn didn't have a violent bone in his body. He didn't, just he would make me go catch bugs and stuff. but he modest and everything, and one time, and he ripped out, and he did this several times actually. He would rip out all of his IVs and anterior connections and try and rip out his ports and things. I mean, anything that was in him, on him, he would rip it out. And he ripped off the Johnny gown and everything. And he's sitting there, just crying and screaming and telling them to get out of his house. And, and at Shands, the transport guys, most of them are football players and, working for extra money and stuff. And he never took a swing at any of them. And they were able to calm him down and convince him, he was okay. But it's amazing the things that you see and that you don't know about, and sharing the things that you don't know. And how do you tell someone, well, that drug's going to keep you alive, but it could kill you in the end? It's so hard.
Yeah. It's a big balancing act, because I know, with me, the drugs took out my kidneys after a few years and had to get a kidney transplant. In the long run, like you said in the beginning of the interview, if you wouldn't probably change it, would you?
Never, because it's funny, since I've lost him, it's like my mind thinks in numbers. It's like, today is 21 weeks he's been gone, and but the liver gave us, 8 years and 4 months and 3 days more than I would have had. And, it's all of that's precious, all that time, because we created more memories during all of that, and I made sure he got out and got to do things. I mean, over the years, as his disease progressed, he had to sell his motorcycle. So then he went to mountain biking, and then he couldn't do that anymore, and then he couldn't drive. So, we had other adventures. I'd take him on trips and get him VIP passes to concerts and take him to hockey, because he's always been my hockey mate. And I wouldn't change it for anything. I just encourage other caregivers to reach out to the Transplant Caregiver group that's on Facebook, because there were times I didn't know what else to do, and there's so many caregivers out there that have faced the same thing or something similar. And that support makes you stronger. And it helps you get through the hard times when, they can't remember, or suddenly they decide they don't want their medications, or for some reason they decide they don't want to shower anymore. There's so many strange things. And it was helpful too, because a lot of liver transplants end up with Parkinson's. And so there's things, that they forget, and how do you work around it, and what other avenues are there. I shared the bags, and I shared the sheet that I created with the transplant group, and those things are helpful. And I got other tools from other people that were helpful to us, because we as the caregivers are the ones that have to be strong. We're the ones that have to push you guys, the transplants, through the hard stuff, and not show weakness. I mean, I couldn't show weakness to Glenn, because that made him hurt more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I can't tell you before the group how many times the Publix over here that I go to has this nice little water area, and it has all these birds and stuff. And I would go over there, and I would just park and sit in my truck and just cry. And when the Parkinson's started stealing some of his memories, his short-term memories, it was really difficult, because every weekend he would get up with me, and he would go with me in the truck with the dogs to get their nails groomed and teeth brushed and stuff. And one Sunday we came back from that, and I took the dogs outside, and he came into the house, and he had taken his shoes off and everything. And when I came back in, he was getting dressed again and said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "Well, we're going with the dogs." And I didn't get my game face on fast enough. And he looked at me and he said, "We've already done it, haven't we?" And it was like, and I couldn't lie to him. I said, "Yes." I mean, I wasn't going to load the dogs back up and go again, you know. And so we both started crying, you know, because there were those instances increased. And you just, you know, I learned through it, you know, he'd see people, or, you know, he'd ask me, you know, where his sister was. And so, well, and I just learned, you know, oh, you know, she had to go back home, and so, okay, you know, and things like that, because I didn't want to take away the pride and strength he had. So a caregiver has to be strong, not just for themselves, but, you know, for you guys too. And sometimes that's really draining. And then, you know, you think everything's going great, and then suddenly they're gone. And when you've been doing this as long as I have, as long as your wife has, and a lot of the others out there, you're totally lost. You are totally lost. So, you know, you don't live by the clock anymore. You realize you don't have to have your phone right near you where you can be ready at a drop of a hat for any emergency, or you don't have to follow up to make sure all the medications are there and doctor's appointments are done. And sometimes after they're gone, you forgot that to cancel one or two, and they call. And here's the funny thing. He was in therapy, physical therapy. And BT, he was stronger than he'd been in 3 years. I mean, he was doing great. The problem was when he fell and broke his femur and everything and went into the hospital, they cold turkeyed his medications. And you can't do that with Parkinson medications. So what happened is he went into respiratory failure, which led to cardiac arrest. But the nurse was there and brought him back. But we couldn't get over. There aren't enough speech therapists in around anymore. So finding one is next to impossible. And he would aspirate, or he'd forget how to breathe. And we were going from therapy to breakfast and laughing at a stupid song we had never heard before. Zach Brown's "Stick 'em on a Chicken." And so we listened to it, and then we laughed so hard, so we played it again, and then we were singing it together because, you know, music's always been our thing. And having a great time. And then he quit breathing, and I took him out of the truck and started CPR, but it wasn't enough. So our last memories were happy too, you know, but
you miss him.
Like you wouldn't believe. I do. I mean, I'm learning to operate independently, and I'm learning to not cry every day. I mean, I have one of those screen things that shows all your pictures and stuff all day long, every day. I got it for him to help him with his memory and stuff. It's actually been helping me since he's been gone, because all those pictures of us together and doing things in the places we've been and the people we know. They pop up all the time, and they're good memories. And I'm reminded that I don't need to be angry. It was worth every moment. And I'm glad it was quick, because I didn't want him to suffer.
You did a great job, and that's what caregivers are all about. So thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
No problem.
There's so many of us out there. You know, you don't realize it. And seriously, there's organizations, you've supported them, the Donate Life, and there's caring hand, giving hands, and there's the transplant groups that meet for picnics and stuff. And although we don't do that, we've lost a lot of transplant members in the past year and a half.
Yeah, last couple of years.
And they're the ones that, they're the ones that have always done everything. Organized the picnics, organized the fundraisers, comedy night, things like that. I mean, and they're gone, Frank's gone and Rick's gone. And what's really sad is, we've been part of a lot of those last walks for organ donors.
You do have a great story, and I really thank you for sharing it, because it's something that, people need to know and they need to hear.
I hope it helps.
I will guarantee that you're helping someone, and hope that, as the clock ticks and the future, moves on, it helps you to heal.
Yeah.
And I know it will. And you've got all those good memories. I will give you one thing when you were talking about caregivers too. My wife had some illnesses a few years ago, or she had some breast cancer. And I always said, it's no fun being on the other side of this bed.
No, it's not, because I've had my own issues, but, you learn to mask it all, like I said, because everything was for him. And by doing that, it was for us. It gave us that time. It gave us those memories. And he loved me. And I think that's what I miss the most, is Glenn loved me. He never let me leave the house without telling me to be safe. He never let me leave the house without telling me he loved me. When I was away too long, he called me. He loved me. And in turn, I loved him too. And that gives your caregiver strength, don't forget.
Thank you so much for our guest, Tree, for bravely sharing her incredible story with us this week. If you have a story that you would like to share and want to connect with us, feel free to do so by sending us an email at bjodom55@gmail.com or at Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast, right there on Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us, and thank you so much for tuning in. Until next week, enjoy the Gift of Life.